Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Ups and Downs for Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I am your host Sean Farragut, and today we're going to be going through episode 6 of season 3 of Strange New Worlds. Can you believe that we're here already? We've already gone over the halfway mark, and it's a bit like, we waited so long, I don't want it to be over yet. But yes, we are going to go through it all. I hope that you've been enjoying this season up to date, and thank you so much to everyone who's been liking, who's been sharing, who's been subscribing, and who's been commenting on the videos and joining us in the live chat. Really, folks, thank you so much. It makes such a difference, honestly. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who reached out at Trek to Vegas last week. Hello, all of you. You were all so lovely. Thanks to everyone who came to the panel. You are wonderful. You are awesome. Thank you so much. And it was a lot of fun seeing people walking around in TrekCulture merch as well. So thank you so much, everyone who's picked up t-shirts. That's really made me smile. I'm not going to lie to you. If you want to get a t-shirt, you can do so. There's a link just underneath the description of this video. As I say, thank you so much again. You are awesome and wonderful and brilliant. So do you want to be extra brilliant and join me as we go through all of the ups and downs for Strange New Worlds Season 3, Episode 6, The Sehlat Who Ate Its Tail. Hi, I'm Tom Larkin, and by now you know Starfleet and I have a complicated relationship. I'm a plain, simple scientist just trying to share my research with the galaxy. But Starfleet doesn't want anyone to know what I'm working on. From the holes of Kronos to the alleys of Romulus, I try to get my findings out there. But Starfleet just started to geo-block my work. Thankfully, Surfshark is here to help me spread my truth. If you head to the link in the description of this video, you'll be able to see what Starfleet doesn't want you to know. Surfshark VPN can help you gain access to over 3,200 servers with over 100 different locations, helping you stay ahead of the geo-blocking that keeps me from getting the truth to you. Surfshark VPN also keeps you safe from those suspicious Federation Section 31 bugged public Wi-Fi networks, so you can browse my content with pure peace of mind. Go to the link in the description of this video and use TrekCulture at checkout to get 4 extra months free with purchase. That, plus a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 support service, lets you know you're in safe hands with Surfshark. Sign up today, learn the truth I don't want you to know, and I, Tom Larkin, have this message to share. Don't tell Starfleet. This week, we're doing things a little bit differently because we're not so much focusing on the crew of the Enterprise as the future crew of the Enterprise. I suppose the first thing to say as we go into this episode, well, actually, there's 2 things I want to say first of all. First is I want to give a bit of a warning to the adults in the audience. There is one moment in this episode that is most definitely catered for an adult audience. And I will discuss it and I will flag it before we get there, but I do just want to give that fair warning as we go in. If you've seen the episode, you probably know what I'm talking about, but just a fair warning there. The second thing is, this is a backdoor pilot. This is an episode that puts Paul Wesley's James Kirk front and center, and we follow what is we're told it's not his first, but one of his first times taking the big seat. Now, it's aboard the Farragut as opposed to the Enterprise, but this feels like a real test of Kirk's mettle. And I have a feeling that that's going to cause some discussion among the audience of Strange New Worlds. I mean, we had our thoughts as we were going through the episode. There is an awful lot to like about this episode. In particular, there's an awful lot to like about Paul Wesley's performance in this episode. But I would be lying if I said I didn't think that this episode had a very specific purpose. My first up of the week is Kirk's log in the beginning. I think this is an up because I think it encapsulates this era of Kirk very well. We get echoes of other Kirks across time as he says, "I believe in going by the book. I just think it would be infinitely more interesting if I wrote the book." That gives you such a great idea of who this iteration of Kirk is. As I say, there's a lot of nods to other versions of the character, but Wesley plays him as someone who has done this day 1,000 times. We arrive at a planet, we make the scan, we stay on the ship, everybody has lunch at 1 o'clock, and then we go to bed. You know, it's a bit the sameness of it all. The Farragut, now I am going to discuss sort of both in cetacean observations and in the body of the episode itself, the year in which this episode is set. Now, I think we say it's roughly 2261, you know, if we're not that long out from the centennial celebrations. Which means the Farragut has already experienced a lot of excitement and, well, frankly, devastation in its lifetime. And some of that has settled again at this stage, but you can see it playing on Kirk. I think as well, I should just say, up to Paul Wesley. I think he gets the most to do. Probably this episode and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow are the two episodes that have really given us the most of Kirk so far. But I think this, well, because this is our prime universe Kirk, this one gives us a real eye-opening look at a man who's learning. He's very much learning. He has that confidence of someone who thinks he's ready for the big chair, but when he's put on the spot and when he's tested, we get to find out if he is ready or not. Their mission takes them to Helon Gamma, and just as Wesley is settling into a speech about how risk is our business, he is encouraging Captain Varel to beam down to the planet, you know, send an away mission, get some proper scans, and, well, it's a good thing Varel didn't listen to him, because about 7 seconds later, the planet itself doesn't explode, but half the surface goes boom, up again for how gorgeous Strange New Worlds looks. I mean, this is a show that is taking advantage of 4K technology and just the amount of CGI available to them, because you have the Farragut that gets absolutely bloody nobbled by the explosion of so much of the planet's surface. You get warping in of the Enterprise firing its phasers to break up the rocks around it so that the Farragut doesn't get extra destroyed. I did ever wonder when I was like, well, the phasers are red. I've seen them be blue. They got an upgrade. These things happen. It's just a fairly gorgeous vista. Terrible, of course, and lots of people are dead, and, you know, it's awful. I mean, that bit, not gorgeous at all. Poor Farragut CMO. But, I mean, the rest of it looks pretty damn good. There was one thing, though, just before we move on. As Kirk is trying to encourage Varel to send down an away mission, I sort of got the feeling that they've just met. That this, even though Kirk has done this day 1,000 times, I didn't get any kind of familiarity between Varel and Kirk. Although, if we know our Farragut history, Varel could be a new captain on board the ship, so actually that might track with the ship's history. When the Enterprise arrives, very quickly an away team is sent over to the Farragut, and we get, you know, this great exclamation from Scotty, which is, you know, in the name of Baird, and, you know, talking about John Logie Baird, and I just want to say, oh, yeah, I know the inventor of Stucky Bill. Still got nightmares from that thing. You know what I'm talking about. We quickly learn that all comms are down aboard the ship, not just the wired comms, if you will, but also handheld communicators. So that's going to be a problem as we go on. The episode then does something that initially had me worried, which is when La'an and Spock arrive on the bridge, there is a glance. There is a glance between La'an and Spock. There is a glance between La'an and Kirk. Now, if you've been following the What the Hell Just Happened series as well, you know that there's been a lot of conversation about the sort of over-reliance or perceived over-reliance on interpersonal relationships in particularly this season and particularly around some of these characters. However, I do like how this moment doesn't linger on it. If you think about it, the last time La'an and Kirk met was in Subspace Rhapsody, when La'an confessed to Kirk that she had basically traveled through time, that she and that Kirk had feelings for each other, and then this Kirk confessed that, well, actually, he had a baby on the way with Carol Marcus, who was back on the starbase, and, well, that's kind of putting paid to anything there. La'an obviously now in a situationship with Spock. So much is done with a glance. And I like that they left it at that. Yes, we know, but we don't need to go on about it. And I appreciated how that was handled. Quickly then, Pike signals over, Kirk gives him the update. Pike does say, look, I understand I wouldn't want to abandon my ship either, but you all need to leave. The Farragut is in too bad shape. So Kirk agrees. Captain Varel, who has suffered from a cranial contusion, is beamed over to the Enterprise. La'an takes some data from the Farragut and beams over to the Enterprise as well. And then about a second later... Okay, alright, so I have my first down. My first down is how, kind of something bad happened and immediately La'an seems to know this is the destroyer of worlds. I think in the wide galaxy, I thought that was a leap, but okay, right. So it is a down, but we'll move on. The ship looks bloody silly. I'm sorry. It's a big mouth and it's got the teeth and everything and it's got all those wavy arms. Now remember, I'm somebody who doesn't like the design of the Narada. It's silly and it's like an ant hive and it doesn't make sense. And that's what I got from the Scavenger's ship here. For 99% of the episode, this ship more had me laughing than feeling anything else. So as dangerous as it is and as full of unpleasant people as it is, it was a bit silly to take it seriously when the ship's open mouth swallows the Enterprise. With the Enterprise now taken captive by this ship, the only real hope seems to be the Farragut, which is in no great shape to do anything, as Scotty will make sure we are aware of as the episode goes on. But with Captain Varel gone off the ship and most of the crew unable to man their stations or having been beamed over to the Enterprise, what we now have is, let's say from the bridge crew of the Farragut, we have Kirk and Alvarez. We also have Spock, Chapel, Uhura, and Scotty. And there is a moment that I really like that is as obvious as they wanted it to be, which is where Spock turns to Kirk and says, "You are now in command, Captain Kirk." Taken up, because I like how they got here. And also, it's obviously a very deliberate decision to have the original series crew members aboard the Enterprise, with the exception of Mbenga, of course, here with Kirk on the Farragut. And I can see what they're doing, and I like what they're doing, which is beginning to establish this dynamic. Aboard the Enterprise, we learn that it has been wrapped up in tendrils. We will then learn that there's an umbilical that stabbed its way through the secondary hull. But here we get La'an giving what she knows, or what she suspects about the ship, this idea of this destroyer of worlds, an astrovore. What sort of saves it for me is she says, look, it's sort of a campfire tale as much as anything else. Stories from the outer rim of ships that will show up and strip planets bare and then disappear again. This is supported by both Ortegas and Mitchell, who have both heard of this as well. Number one even says, yes, she has heard stories like this. So that does save it for me a little bit, even if we got here a bit quickly. And it also helps to raise the stakes. I mean, the stakes were high, the thing just nobbled a planet, as I say. But okay, now we have a bit of a context for what it is as well. Ortegas is the one to say, even the Klingons didn't like this ship. And actually, as we will learn as the episode goes on, the Klingons didn't fare too well against this ship either. On board the Farragut, acting Captain Kirk is beginning to make his first captain's log. And as he said, it's very odd, this feeling. You know, under better circumstances, he might be thrilled to be making a captain's log, but it's not better circumstances. Already you can see in how Wesley is playing the part, but also how the other characters are treating him, up for the presentation of be careful what you wish for. You wanted to be Captain Kirk. Well, you've got it. How does it feel? And he knows immediately this is nothing like he wanted and nothing like he planned. There is then a briefing scene in the Farragut's ready room. And also, I should say as well, because, you know, we discussed this in our What the Hell Just Happened video. I am very aware of how budgets work, but also the Farragut is so clearly the Enterprise and we just moved a table. That's just little things like that. I do like that they changed the images on the wall. For example, lots of people noticed last week that the NX-01 and the Phoenix adorned the ready room on the Enterprise, whereas here it's either the Farragut or another Bellerophon class ship and Starbase 1. Just little touches like that do make a difference. But anyway, as we have this briefing scene, there was one thing I didn't like, and it was this scene in particular. Scotty not knowing what to call the captain, because it comes across more as disrespectful rather than anything else. As a commander, acting captain. This isn't Scotty's first mission. And that's the action of someone who has never had a mission where a command has changed before. We know that Scotty has served on several ships, at least the Stardiver and the Enterprise. That's a down for me. The crew reveal their internal scan of the scavenger ship. That's when we get the confirmation that the Klingons were absorbed by it as well, so Then we get a great discussion over the mass of the ship prevents it from exceeding certain warp numbers. And not only is that a nice nod to another story in Star Trek's history, I've always liked that there is limitations like that. You know, small agile ships, Voyager, for example, can do warp 9.99975, it's like, how close can we get to warp 10 without breaking the barrier this week? Whereas I like that when you've got a ship that's, roughly the size of a moon, no, it's not going to travel at those kind of speeds. And I like that they keep that sort of consistent. This may be a prequel to the other story I mentioned, obviously stick around for citation observations, but I do like that that is a logic that tracks through the franchise. It does lead to, I'll say, some fairly telegraphed moments. Kirk saying to Scotty, I'm going to need you to perform some miracles. You don't say. But that's neither a down nor an up. I say I like how it's part of the establishment of this character dynamic. I mean, I guess, spoiler alert, but I really do like particularly Kirk and Scotty in this episode. Aboard the Enterprise, I made a note that I'm not sure we're following this in real time, for example. So, when Pike says to La'an, send a runner down to engineering, and La'an says, well, the last runner we sent never came back, that suggests it's been a little bit longer than, we're shown on screen, which I actually like. It's like, okay, so it's not just second after second after second. But this then leads to our scene where they dress up in sort of battle away gear, and feels bad to say it, but Pike, La'an, and Redshirt go down to try and get to engineering, and then Pelia comes around the corner, and oh, Pelia. Down, time and a place for the quips. Pike and La'an have their phasers out. Pelia walks around the corner, and in a crisis situation where every second matters, you don't get to live to 5,000 by getting shot all of the time, and engineering would be a bad place to go unless you want to drown in your own gurgling blood. There is an issue with particularly season 3 of Strange New Worlds, and it's an issue of tone. This is something we spoke about in both the podcast and our What the Hell Just Happened video. Everyone is really good at what they're doing. We really are enjoying everyone in this season. And then there's just moments that slip through and it breaks the tone and the mood. This scene entirely shatters the tone. I feel no threat. If Pelia has time to go into an academic thesis of how getting shot would be bad for living with the tongue-in-cheek tone that Carol Kane delivers the line in, then I don't feel the threat of what's going on around them. Even though in the back of my head I know the Enterprise is trapped inside of a ship and we now have the suggestion that there's intruders in the ship, and it's a bit, there was a time and a place and this wasn't it. And actually, speaking of a time and a place, I do want to give an up, this might sound odd, to the Scavenger's weapons, because they shoot straight through the wall. There is sort of a trope in cinema, isn't it, that if you stand behind the thinnest piece of sheet metal, or even cardboard, let's be real, you are suddenly immune to bullets, lasers, phasers, all of the above. It's an established thing, it's in hundreds and hundreds of different things. And yet here, when crewman Redshirt stands behind this outcropping, yeah, she's shot. I'm not glad that she's shot. Please don't get me wrong, this poor person. But sometimes phaser battles in Star Trek can be a little bit sanitized. Because for one thing, you have stun setting. So, is getting shot that bad, really? And then sometimes you get shot, you can kind of walk it off. And is it that bad, really? And then, okay, there's that time in Enterprise where somebody gets nicked by a phaser set to kill. And it was kind of grim. But yeah, we're going to park that one for a second. Yeah, but like, this isn't a phaser. You know, this is sort of I think Lan describes it as like an iron. I'll use the word bullet. It isn't a bullet. She uses the word bullet to describe it. But anyway, if you are someone who has relied on there being energy and particle weapons for so long, perhaps you are not able to anticipate things like bullets. And it was a bit of a grim raising of the stakes. They do get away. Well, Pike and La'an bring this crewman to the galley, but it's too late for her. It's a dark moment in the episode, full of dark moments. Even in here, there is lighter bits, but I do think that they do get the balance well here. Aboard the Farragut, we get a great exchange between Kirk and Scotty, and also just a great shot of Scotty in the Jeffries tube, which, for fans of the original series, that's just lovely. Just leave Martin Quinn in there, it looks great. And again, this developing relationship between Kirk and Scotty, where Scotty really tries to warn Kirk of the limitations of the ship. And here, Scotty, I guess, walks a fine line between, what's the word I'm looking for? Insubordinate, but earnest. You know, not just blindly following orders. He wants to make sure Kirk is aware of what he's asking Scotty and the ship to do. Because Kirk has brought the knowledge that the next planet in the ship's path, the ship that is hunting for this, substance called Aldentium, is Sullivan's planet that has 100 million people on it. However, they are a pre-warp civilization, so they can't warn them the limitations of the Prime Directive. This whole scene is an up, because again, raises the stakes again, helps you understand Kirk and Scotty, helps you understand Scotty really likes so much of this scene here. And although Scotty in the end agrees to push the engines as far and as hard as they possibly can against his better judgment, you can tell that he will work on these miracles for Kirk, not just because he's Kirk, but because that's what the mission demands. But I really, really like it. I mean, in a very relatively short amount of time, you are setting up how these characters will interact going forward. On the Enterprise, there was an odd moment where it was neither a down nor an up, but Ortegas taps two wires together and is seemingly disappointed that she isn't blown back out of her chair. And initially I thought, all right, listen, time and a place to do your thrill seeking. But then I thought, no, she's disappointed because she was taking that risk. It could have resulted in her being shocked across the room, but it might have jump-started the systems. Kind of taking a break and taking a breath and watching that again. It's like, oh yeah, no, actually, no, that is good. But we get from that the Enterprise is pretty low on power, and we're going to need to do something to help, certainly, communications throughout the ship. If only there were someone who had some sort of expertise in some other type of communication. There is, however, something in this scene that it's sort of an addendum, if you like. No, it's a down on its own, and it's Ortegas's quip. When number one asks, could we manually fire the thrusters? We could if we want to very quickly die. Time and a place for the quips. This is what I mean about it breaks the mood. What should be our sort of light, kind of almost comic scene of the episode, where we go to Pelia's quarters, we see what's in Pelia's quarters, which is, I'm with Mbenga on that one, they're exactly what I would have imagined Pelia's quarters to look like. That should be our breath of air in this episode. Instead, it's peppered with these moments that just shatter the tension. It's not that the tension doesn't come back, it's just I wish it wasn't like Swiss bloody cheese with the amount of breaks. But yes, we do get Pelia saying, for once I'm glad to have lived through the 1980s. Now listen, I was in the 1980s, not for very long, but I was there, and I recognised rather a lot of the things that were in her quarters, I'm not going to lie to you. Does that make me feel a certain age? Maybe it does, but sure, listen, here we are. Scotty has managed to jury-rig the Farragut to go up to warp 7, and we get another great shot of the Farragut at warp. This ship has really grown on me, by the way. When it was first introduced back in Equality of Mercy, I wasn't really sold on the design of the Bellerophon class. I'm sold. I really like it now. Unfortunately, we have Kirk sort of, you know this is bravado. You know this isn't, he doesn't genuinely feel the confidence of being right and will therefore accept drinks in the galley. It's a way of trying to show that he's in command without actually feeling like he's in command. And again, I think this works. A lot of the scenes on the Farragut really work for me. So when the ship suddenly drops out of warp and then you have Scotty arrive on the bridge, and he's not annoyed, he's angry. Scotty is pissed off because he told Kirk this is what would happen. But you also have, I think he's angry at himself. Not that he holds himself responsible, but at the same time, he probably does. He's Scotty. If there's something wrong with the ship, regardless of the ship, he, as the engineer, blames himself. He may also blame Kirk for putting him in a situation where he has to blame himself. It comes across well, and Martin Quinn really sells it. It is an up from me. And you can see Kirk is at a loss as well. When Scotty says, "You don't understand. They're not broken. They are completely dead. They are now paperweight nacelles hanging underneath the saucer section of this ship. We push the plasma manifolds too hard, they're done." And he's stuck. You have Chapel, Uhura, Scotty, and Spock start to discuss different plans, different options, and they're not great options. One of them is abandon ship and make a run for it in the escape pods. Another one is stay where they are and effectively play dead. Kirk says he chooses neither option. I like a lot of this, because we do get the characters who know each other very well are a bit like, what? Neither option, that's great, isn't it? But also, Kirk then turns and snaps at Uhura, which is uncomfortable, and it's meant to be. He snaps at her, and he says, "I need thinking space," and goes into the ready room. There is a moment after that where the TOS crew are sort of discussing what they can do in case they need to strip Kirk of command. And on the one hand, it's uncomfortable. It's meant to be, but on the one hand, it is uncomfortable. But what I thought was absolutely hilarious is the Farragut crew member, Alvarez, standing behind them says, "Oh, this isn't his first time in the big chair, but it's first time in this kind of thing. Anyway, I'm out of here. I am not taking part in this conversation. You do you." I thought that was, I enjoyed that one. I hate to say that Kirk snapping at Uhura is an up, but we're watching Kirk under extreme duress. It's an up from me. Back on the Enterprise, Pike and La'an have an idea while they're in the galley. These two intruders are trying to force their way through the door, and Pike spots this bottle of whiskey or ale, or he had it specially important. La'an grabs it and says, "I'll get you another one." They roll it toward the intruders and shoot the bottle, which causes it to explode in flames. Alcohol flammable, who knew? Coating them in flames. Now, it doesn't kill them or anything of the sort, but it does allow Pike and La'an to get out of there. There's a lot of clues for the eventual reveal of who these intruders are. Some bits don't massively work for me, La'an saying even the Gorn considered them monsters. And, part of me is like, really? Did the Gorn stop to chat with you, La'an, when you were younger? Logic. But also, kind of like, she could have overheard something. Do you know what I mean? You can kind of explain that bit away. So I'm not too massively stressed with that. We then get to Pelias' quarters, and as I say, look, it's exactly what I thought it was going to be. And I want to give everyone a heads up now. That moment I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I'm going to reference that very, very soon. The quarters themselves are an up. You see just lots of little, there is Easter egg, sure, but it's less Easter eggs and more just Pelias' trip through time. For example, I love the Warhol print. I just thought it looks brilliant. And then we go over to, her box of phones. Okay, look, I have a down, and a down is, how do Ortegas and Mbenga not know what a phone is? They literally use handheld communicators every day on the Enterprise. And yes, technology changes, I know that, but it's a stretch. It's a stretch for them to not know what a phone is. Although it does set up the rather adult gag of Ortegas holding the phone receiver in her hand and mistaking it for a personal massager, which I think is one of the most adult jokes I think Star Trek has done in a very long time. And it definitely took me by surprise. And it certainly took Mbenga by surprise, as evidenced by the look on his face. There is a moment, though, that did make me seriously laugh. And, Pelias' suggestion of effectively we're going to wire the Enterprise. But more than that, we're going to strip all the copper wire on the Enterprise. Yeah, I get the feeling Pelly is someone who's probably stripped a building for copper wire before. Absolute up to me. Over on the Farragut in the Ready Room, we learn two things. First, Captain Varel was a fan of archery, for example, but also Kirk is struggling. The burden of command is mighty, and it is heavy, and he's trying to focus on one thing. So for example, he's putting his chessboard back together. He had an ongoing game with Varel. And when Spock is the one who enters and speaks to him, there is still a little bit of, it could come across as rude. And Spock says, do you mind if I interrupt? You already have, but please continue, you may do so again. That I take as banter as opposed to snapping. I mean, we did just see Kirk snap at Uhura, but I think he's already cooled down. And it's a bit of banter between them, even in, this is what I mean about the balance of light versus heavy, because every word Kirk says comes with the weight of what's going on around them. There's great moments in this, Spock attempting to level with him by saying, it would be not good, as opposed to illogical or dreadful or something like that. You can see he begins to understand how to deal with Kirk. And look, Kirk and Spock are an up in this episode. I like Paul Wesley and Ethan Peck together. They are sitting on 60 years of Star Trek history and how well most of the audience know Kirk and Spock as characters. And I think they carry it well. We get then our statement of the episode title and how it plays into everything. That Kirk, like his mother used to say, describing him as the dog that caught the car. I think of things like the Dark Knight, I'm like a mad dog. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I get it. And Spock, it's quite sweet actually, says, there is a similar saying on Vulcan, the slot who ate its tail. But he goes on to say that you do have an advantage over a quadrupedal animal. Yeah, okay, yes he does. Kirk has much more control over some of the situation, maybe not all of it. And it's a good, healthy reminder for Kirk to take a breath and come back out and deal with the crisis. And now I want to take a moment. This is probably something that, maybe this is a station observation, but I think this is an important context for this scene and for how Kirk is acting. In the original series episode Obsession, we learned that in 2257, the Farragut came into contact with a sweet-smelling cloud that killed. And not only did it kill, but it killed hundreds of the Farragut's crew, including its then captain, Captain Garavik. Kirk blamed himself for his hesitation to fire on this cloud for the deaths of all of that crew. That's something that isn't resolved until the in-universe date of 2268, which means if this episode takes place in 2261 or even 2262, Kirk is still dealing with that trauma. And that is informing so much of his action and decisions as he is left in charge of the Farragut. From his point of view, he has seen another captain gravely injured, for all he knows, dead, on board the Enterprise, and it must be waking all of these fearful moments in him again. Now, I will, stress to say, that is me reading into the context of what I know about the history of the character. If you just take this episode at face value, what you see is a man dealing with the pressures of command. I think it works without knowing the context of Obsession, and I think it works even a little bit better with knowing that. Either way, I think it works. There's a moment where Kirk says, I was determined to sit in that chair faster than anyone. Now, not only is that an Easter egg, which we'll talk about, it's also an up. Because yes, that I think is the simplest boiling down of this iteration of Kirk. It's about getting to the top as quickly as possible. And of course, we know, having watched so much Star Trek, but also just in life, getting to the top without earning your way there sets you up for a fall. And that's what's happened to Kirk here. He does, however, come back on the bridge with an apology. He says that we got off on the wrong foot, and there is a great gag here. Look, I'm not one for rousing speeches. Sure you're not. Taken up there, Kirk. They come up with their plan, which is to make the Farragut an attractive piece of bait for the scavenger ship. Both Chapel and Scotty come up with the idea of using antiprotons in what's left of the plasma manifolds to make it look as though the ship is rich in aldentium, which is, as they discuss, the Achilles heel and also the #1 food substance, for want of a better word, for this scavenger ship. Basically, they're going to make the Farragut this completely unignorable banquet for the scavengers. Fine, it's scary. I wouldn't exactly like to be, sitting in front of a lion's cage wearing a stake around my neck, but whatever it takes to save the Enterprise. And of course, Sullivan's planet. Back on board the Enterprise, Pike and La'an, they find this umbilical arm, which is what is draining the Enterprise of all of its power. To be fair, they found it a little bit earlier, but I was busy. They come into contact with these alien intruders again, which leads to another shootout. There's a sort of a cool bit where they fire on these intruders, but the intruders' machines absorb this. That makes a kind of a strange high-pitched noise, which only adds to the alien nature of these intruders. But as Pike and La'an engage them in effectively hand-to-hand combat, La'an does manage to kill hers. Pike gets knocked to the ground and has his visor broken. There's fumes. I should have mentioned it earlier. But anyway, his visor gets broken off, which reveals his face. This intruder picks up Pike's phaser, points it at him, and hesitates. Once you know what the reveal is, I like how they've been dropping the clues throughout this episode, and I like this hesitation. This hesitation is in fact slightly devastating. This is an up from me, and it's going to get dark. We do get some more gags with Pelia. One I like where she says, "I haven't done this since I was a roadie for the dead." Ortegas just goes, "Your species can talk to the dead?" I get references. But then we get a scene which I quite like, where you have Mbenga is going to be operating some thrusters with a joystick. #1 is going to be operating thrusters with a joystick. And Ortegas is going to be coordinating from the bridge via this via this phone. And I like this, and I love this. I actually really like the split screen as well, because I remember if we go back to the Discoveries episode, Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2, I really like how they did that in the beginning of that episode. I know it can be divisive because it's a different type of making television, but I liked it. It was an up from me. Then Pike and La'an have the idea of souring the milk. They are going to flood this umbilical with baryon particles, which is going to effectively make the Enterprise a lot less attractive as a food source to the scavenger ship. They also did manage to get a kill shot at that second intruder. There is they connect the baryon particles, they do that. We get actually a funny gag. This is again where I think the break in tension actually is good, where Pike says, "Take a step back," and La'an says, "If that thing explodes, we'll lose the entire secondary hull of the Enterprise." And he says, "We'll take a big step back then." That I like. It works. The umbilical is removed. Pike and La'an, they are now on their way to go and find the other intruder's body, as it turns out. Ortegas begins to at least attempt to pilot the ship. We get, kind of Pelia going, "I don't mean to be a backseat driver, but you're scraping the hull." This bit works for me. This bit works for me as well. #1 has the idea that apparently all first officers will have at some point in their career. When in doubt, depressurize something. That was an up. Outside the ship, which has dropped out of warp, you've got what's left of the Farragut there. The Farragut manages to knock out all of the power of the scavenger ship because this anti-proton plan worked. We then, we get the Farragut piloting around with no nacelles, because I understand why back in the day budget was a bit prohibitive when it comes to just jettisoning things like nacelles, but a lot of problems could have been dealt with if they just, detached a nacelle. Like, for example, the episode that references another first officer depressurizing something. If they just detached a nacelle, but budgets are things. The scavenger ship is knocked out of power. The Enterprise then escapes from all of its bindings and starts flying toward the mouth of the ship to escape. It looks like the scavenger's power is coming back online. You can see those grappling arms coming back toward the Enterprise again. Phaser fire does very little, so Spock has the idea. Instead of firing on the ship, fire on what's inside it. He targets the Klingon D7 ship that was stuck inside, causing it to explode, and it was apparently carrying several nukes. It explodes and destroys the entire scavenger ship, and for a moment,
It's cheers all around. We have won the day, the scavengers have been destroyed, and the 2 ships are safe. Hooray! Right? The gut punch arrives quickly. Spock is doing a scan of the rapidly dwindling 7,000 life forms from that ship. Meanwhile, on board the Enterprise, Pike has discovered the body of the intruder. Spock tells Kirk they're human life signs, as Pike removes the faceplate of this intruder, revealing a, for want of a better description, perfectly normal looking human being. This human being who hesitated before firing on Pike. We do get, and in the midst of this devastation, we get a moment that made me sit forward in my chair. The XCV-100. Those of you who know, you know that the ring ship Enterprise has been a beloved one for a long time. And this is the closest we've come to having a vaguely functioning one on screen in live action. We have seen pictures, we have seen models, but to have the head of an XCV here was a big deal. But it's also part of the devastating realization that by giving the order to fire, they've just destroyed a ship full of humans. This leads to our effectively briefing scene where Uhura brings them up to speed on who they were. This ship originated as a ship from the mid-21st century on Earth, where the best of us, as Pelia describes them, because she remembers this, went off into space thinking that the environmental crisis on Earth at the time was too great to be solved. It was from the ashes of World War III while the fires were still burning, but before first contact with the Vulcans. So they hadn't, at that point, had anything like warp technology. Again, small thing to notice, but up to Mitchell being part of this briefing as well. You know, she was an essential part of this episode and has been several times, but you're kind of like, I want you to get your moment. But she's here in this briefing scene as well. This part of the episode only serves to improve everything that we've already just seen. Kirk asks the million-dollar question. What went wrong? These brave scientists and astronauts went out into space, you know, full of hope with their families that they could find a better life. And instead we learn, you know, roughly 200 years later, that not only did they not find a better life, but they became as savage and as bloodthirsty as any race out there. Seemingly. It is a gut punch. And it's powerful. And it works because of how they play it. This could have been a sort of a rug pull gimmick, but I think it works because it makes us think very much there but for the grace of. What would we do in that situation? And we have seen other colonies of humans throughout Star Trek's history as well, where things have gone right and things maybe haven't gone so right. This is one of the darkest versions of it, and we don't get the answer. We don't know what happened. We just know that for whatever reason, this is the path that their mini society chose to take. The episode closes with a scene between Kirk and Pike in the ready room of the Farragut. There's a little bit of banter about, you know, Admiral April's going to be furious when, you know, he sees me pull up in the Farragut with no nacelles, and we get a kind of a light bit of, you know, he's very partial to Aldebaran whiskey. And you get a moment of sort of Pike imparting his wisdom. And what he really wants Kirk to be aware of is that there is a burden in command. That you do get to make the big choices, but you have to live with the consequences. And I think it is a fantastic scene. In established pre-original series, you know, there was no relationship between Pike and Kirk. You know, there was obvious reasons. Kirk, you know, William Shatner was a recast after a pilot didn't get sold. You know, there was no crossover. And even the menagerie, it was Pike and Spock's relationship, not Pike and Kirk's. So we only really got that when it came to Trek 09, and you had Bruce Greenwood and Chris Pine's versions of Pike and Kirk. And I really like what they did there, that it was sort of father figure mentor. They're doing something different here again, because there is that sort of mentor-mentee thing, but less so. They are two officers, both of whom are now aware of what comes with the big chair. And I like it. But Pike delivers this incredible pearl of wisdom about empathy. Now, this isn't up for me. Empathy isn't conditional, it is given or it isn't. And maybe by doing this, it will encourage Kirk, who freely admits he didn't see those scavengers as people until after he gave the order to fire, that maybe if there's one thing he could take away from this, it's knowing that his enemies, just as much as his allies, are people too. The episode closed on a contemplative note, but that is my Latinum up. They go out on their strongest note of the episode. Whew, nice and light. Will you join me, please? At Cetacean Observations. There is plenty in this episode. So for example, in the beginning, Stargate's blending together Kirk's sort of feeling of being bored. That feels like a deliberate nod to Star Trek Beyond, where you had Chris Pine's Kirk going through exactly the same situation. There's a lot of references to risk in this one. They walked a line of, was it a bit heavy-handed? But, you know, saying Israel allergic to risk, of course reminding us of that great risk is our business speech from the original series. I love Kirk saying, buy the book. Now, it'd be more interesting if I got to write it. It just makes me think of that scene from 5. Okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it by the book, as they're off to meet God. We see some bubble shields around the Enterprise, which makes me very happy. You know me, I like a bubble shield. And then, yeah, we have John Logie Baird. Now, this was written beforehand, but for me, I'm just thinking of Doctor Who straight away. Good old Stucky Bill. Again, that is terrifying. The glance between La'an and Kirk, obviously a silent reference to their conversation in Subspace Rhapsody, which itself was a reference to a version of their relationship in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. The yellow data cards that La'an brings back to the Enterprise, a lovely update of what we saw back in the original series. The ship, very obvious nods to the Doomsday Machine, but also very glad that they didn't literally go down that road as well. There was a moment where Captain Varel, who's Vulcan, needs a craniectomy, which Chapel was not qualified to perform. Now, a craniectomy is a real procedure, but of course the fact that she's Vulcan, it's a bit hard not to think of Spock's brain when you hear of anything to do with a Vulcan brain. Captain Kirk for the first time, where Spock Uhura say it, and the TOS theme plays in the background. Inside of the scavenger ship, very reminiscent of things like the Narada. Mitchell references stellar cartography. We get some tall chess sitting there in Varel's ready room. And as I say, they're more nods than anything, but references to the episode Obsession from the original series. We see Starbase 1 on the wall of the Farragut's ready room, and of course, as I say, at least another Bellerophon class ship, if not the Farragut itself. The fact that the scavenger ship can only move at a certain speed references Year of Hell, because the Krenim temporal weapon ship, it said that its mass prevents it from exceeding, I believe it's warp 6. So again, just this kind of through line of once your ship gets too big, you can't do the top speeds. In the debris sort of field that we see on the screen, we see what looks to be at least part of a Vulcan ring ship from Enterprise. Now, you might have to squint to be fair. Kirk asks Scotty to perform some miracles. Scotty at one point is there hanging out of a Jeffries tube as well, and I love this updated design for it. Actually, speaking of new designs and updated designs, I love the fact that they built the science lab for season 3, and by gosh, they will show you the science lab in season 3. That's not a criticism, by the way. That science lab is absolutely beautiful. I like that at one point, Kirk confirms that duct tape is still in existence in the 23rd century. When we get to Pelia's quarters, she says, as a friend of mine once said, let there be light. I'm going to assume that that's a joke because, she is old enough to have known the original author of the Book of Genesis, but I'm gonna assume that that's a bit of a joke instead. Around her quarters, we see a chess set, we see a harp, we see a jukebox, we see this Warhol print, which I love, and we see this kind of amazing armor. I might be wrong, but I'm going to be honest, a swift Google shows me that it might be from the maker's Romance of Men, a Tozei Gosuko style. It has Wakidate horns, Shikoro back neck guard, Kusazori skirt. You can tell I'm learning on the fly here, but it does look like something that is custom built and readily available. I just thought it was really cool. You have Roman busts, you've got roller skates, you've got the cat phone. Did you have a cat phone? I never had a cat phone, but I know the cat phone. We had this kind of golf for tennis visor as well. Also, she hands Mbenga an Atari console, talking about how, she used to blow up 8-bit ships, but she did blow up ships. It was a good time on a Friday night. The personal massager joke. Captain Varel is into archery. It's a stretch, but I know another captain named Archer. Kirk says he was determined to sit in the chair faster than anyone else. Well, remember in Star Trek 09 when Kirk becomes captain in about 0.68 seconds? Well, alright, it's about 3 years, but still, I mean, that's rocketing through the Academy and into command. The Sehlat who ate its tail. The Sehlat, of course, being, you know, this is a shout out to the animated series again. I like that season 3 is leaning into its animated series references. Kirk saying rousing speeches aren't his forte. You know, this idea of the ship will never stop, never be enough. As I say, I think reference to the Doomsday Machine without going over the top. There is a funny point where they want the scavenger ship to be, you know, so focused on the Farragut that they will, you know, they won't be able to ignore its tailpipe. And as it does, the shot cuts to Uhura. If you think of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, it's Uhura who says the Klingon bird of prey, thing's gotta have a tailpipe, right? But I'm not gonna lie, it's the 2 times I can remember the word tailpipe being said, and Uhura plays a large part in both of those scenes. And also, as they get to work, Nami Malumad's score does seem to evoke the Wrath of Khan music there. Baryon particles, referencing back to Starship Mine from Star Trek The Next Generation. Roadie for the Dead, of course, the Grateful Dead. The split screen, which feels like a reference to Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2. Anti-protons, well, we've heard of them several times, but, you know, another big one is in our retro review for Star Trek First Contact. Hawk is told, don't fire at the dish, it's charged with anti-protons, you could destroy half the ship. How many times has Uhura helmed? Twice, including this one. And there's also that time that she piloted the ship with SpongeBob. Using joysticks to pilot the Enterprise. Well, we've seen that before, I think most notably in Star Trek Insurrection. We get references to things like deuterium. Sucked out or blown out, Pike? I think Data might have something to say about that. Depressurization, the calling card of the first officer, cause and effect. It's Riker's idea to depressurize main shuttle bay that saves the ship. We see a nice D7. The XCV-100, which was nearly the Latinum up for the episode, which is of course, you know, a massive call to the ring ship Enterprise. And that's everything for our video today, folks. Thank you so much for watching along. What are you thinking of the season so far? This was an episode, and actually I've said this a few times this season, this was an episode that benefited a rewatch. Some of the things that I might have struggled with a little bit in season 3 are sometimes on the first presentation, maybe it comes across one way, but, you know, a couple of times in, I think it's really starting. I really enjoyed this episode is what I'm saying, but it did take me a couple of watches. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do let us know in the comments below. And thank you so much everyone who is, as I say, commenting along, and you are awesome. Please continue to like, share, and subscribe to the videos. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone who's picking up merch. As I say, you can pick up yours at the link below the description of this video. Everyone, you are awesome. You are wonderful. I will see you next week for episode 7 of Strange New Worlds Season 3. Until then, live long and prosper, look after yourself, be kind to yourself and others, and I will see you soon. Thanks very much.